Is it time to start? I've just started the broadcast. Is that too early? Well, I can't see them. Just check on the. Just say that we're broadcasting now.
Okay. Right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for attending the Health and Wellbeing Board, which was rescheduled from earlier this year. Can I take the first item, which is the election of chairman, please? Would anyone like to propose somebody? Councillor Grottick.
I'd like to propose Councillor Joel Williams.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. All those in favour? Is there support on the call? So they can vote, and I support it too. So, do you need to record that? Okay. Hello, guys that are on the phone. Do you support the election of Councillor Williams as chairman of the Health and Wellbeing Board? Great.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Can we move on to agenda item 2, which is election of vice chairman for the Health and Wellbeing Board? Do I have any nominations for vice chairman? Councillor Grottick.
I'd like to propose Councillor Adrian Davis.
Seconder, Councillor Francis.
I'd like to second that.
Any other nominations for the record? No. Councillor Adrian Davis. All in favour? There you go. Any colleagues on the mainland, are you supportive of Adrian Davis attending as Vice Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board? Can you hear me in Cornwall?
I'm working from Grace, but the connection is really bad and not really hear you very much.
It all sounds a bit ghostly on this side as well. Can I just check if it's the same in all areas? Are you in different... Can we just conclude the Vice Chairman section and we'll move on to connectivity? So are we in favour of Councillor Adrian Davis being Vice Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board? Excellent. Councillor Davis, would you like to join us at the front of the table? So we expect, is Andrew on the other end? We've got. Okay. I think we just heard you there, Andrew. It's not the loudest reception we'd ever heard, but we could make you out. Does it help if we speak closer to microphones or slower? Okay.
Seeing on the blue bar that's flickering for Joel, I think that's suggesting that her connection is very poor.
Okay.
And Caroline's actually muted at the moment, or we don't have sound. So we would need her to unmute to tell us that she can hear us.
Caroline, can I assume you can't hear us at the moment? And Jill, are you hearing anything? Andrew, are you hearing us? I noticed there's a mute symbol on your...
Sorry, it suggested somebody had left the meeting. It flashed up. I don't know if they have.
Can I inquire if anyone on the mainland can currently hear us? Silence.
Sound like the down, I'm afraid.
So we can hear you, but we can't actually understand you.
We'll have to postpone it again.
What I might suggest, Chair, is if we're able to continue doing the business, we will try and listen and understand. If there's something where you need my specific response to, then if you just turn around, I'm kind of looking at the back of your head and you can wave at me.
Andrew, I'm very conscious I have my back to you, which isn't obviously the best or most polite position to be in either. So we're facing some sound and visual issues at the moment. We're just deliberating whether we need to postpone again in the interest of having meaningful debate, rather than us trying to speak slowly and hearing only part of what you're trying to tell us.
For Skype for Businesses and the webcam behind us, so we are largely facing away from it.
So try without microphones.
If without microphones, to make it input.
Andrew, we've just turned our microphones off. Does that improve anything?
Is there any improvement, Andrew? Yes, there is.
Much greater as well.
We have to face the vote.
Which is up there.
Chairman, if I may say, this is ridiculous. We have to have
I would agree.
It's a waste of time.
It's turning into a multi-point schedule.
Can you apologise to our mainland colleagues, please, Chairman?
Colleagues, if you can hear me, we would just like to apologise for the position you find yourselves in again. We feel it's not conducive to carry on a meeting where we're struggling to be heard. It's not in the best interest of the agenda items before us to carry on, and it seems a waste of everyone's time if we carry on with what could potentially become a bit of a farce.
There is an option, because that, I realise that's a very long extension, that webcam, bring it through here and into the middle. And if that works, we should be able to pick up everybody around the meeting.
If you can hear us, we're just going to try to move the microphone.
I would just say, these people have princely diaries and we've now disturbed their diaries twice. And after one, we're hugely embarrassed.
It's certainly not very going forward, I can't. But we basically got back to this one.
Unless we can get a proper functioning arrangement in the next 10 minutes, we've got no alternative. That's the same reason, because there's have no other rules in the community.
Let's not try.
Oh, absolutely, I'm all the time. Not trying to
To give you some confidence, the audio is dramatically
Thank you, Andrew. We may be just pointing the webcam itself at this evening at this point. So it's the next one, me.
Just quickly introduce their names. I'll confirm whether we can hear them okay.
Okay, Andrew, we can hear you, so we'll just go around to the table here and introduce ourselves. And if you don't, you can just go on my way, so we can perhaps move people around. So speaking now is John Williams, recently elected Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board.
Ashley Carr.
Paul Charnock, Health Watch Isles of Scilly.
Robert Francis, Chair of Council.
Fran Grottick, Vice Chair of Council.
Bob Dawson, Officer supporting the committee.
Adrian Davis, Lead Member for Adults for the Council and just elected Vice Chairman of this committee, this board.
That's everyone around the table on St Mary's. Perhaps colleagues on the mainland could introduce themselves.
Andrew Abbott from NHS Kelly.
Jill Thornton from NHS Canada supporting the Better Care Fund.
Hi, it's Caroline Cole. Can you hear me?
We can, Caroline, yes.
Lovely help. I struggled. I think it's Carol the national, but I couldn't hear anybody else very well. You know what I thought?
Yeah, so I think those that are nearest the microphone were clear. Those who weren't were a bit echoey.
Can I perhaps ask if Robert and Paul to close to this end?
I'm going to go.
Do we have any declarations of interest under agenda item 3 for today's meeting, please? Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. I currently represent the Council on the Cornwall Partnership Trust.
Thank you. Did I hear something from you, Andrew, then?
No declarations of interest.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's the only declaration of interest we have today. Agenda item 4 is minutes of previous meetings from the 30th of January 2018. In terms of factual accuracy, does anyone have any comments on those? In that case, are we happy to accept them as a true and accurate record? Do we have a proposer for the record, please? Councillor Grottick.
I propose that the minutes are a correct record, Chairman.
Anyone happy to second that position? Okay. Are you happy to?
I wasn't here, I'm sorry.
Am I okay to second them as a?
I'll second them.
Thank you very much. I don't have any urgent items as chair, but I just wanted to make just a couple of quick comments. Firstly, apologies for those who turned up for the meeting a couple of weeks ago, either in person or virtually. IT issues got the better of us then. I just also wanted to pass on thanks of Barbara Jones and Carol Clark from Health Watch, who served the board magnificently over the last few years, and also thank Bob as well for pulling the meeting together under some trying circumstances at times. I think that moves us on to part one of the meeting, agenda item 6, which is the Isles of Scilly Public Health Service.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a brief note for the board members. This is an external report from our Director of Public Health, but under the kind of guidance provided by our monitoring officer, I was asked to provide a very short covering report, which has a recommendation on the front. So I think this is a very comprehensive report, and I'd like to pass over to Caroline Court to take members through it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
We can, yes. Just.
I'm assuming it's my turn now, so I'll do my bit. I won't go through in detail, because I'll see if you've read it, but I will just highlight some specific areas. So in the volume report, page 13, I've listed there the prescribed and non-prescribed functions. So I've thought that prescribed functions are mandated. And therefore, the requirement is that we use the public health grant that comes from Public Health England for those services primarily. So on page 14, we have a breakdown of last year's grant, which was 134,000, and what that was used for. And you'll see the majority, the main use goes to health and school nursing services. There's also a significant amount goes to strong animal services, and then there's public health core team, which covers a range of mandated functions, including commissioning function, public health advice to the NHS. A lot of that in the past year has been around the SCP, sorting the SCP, providing intelligence, and we'll talk about the JETS, and then another paper later on today. So that gives you a rough idea of what it is spent for. And then at the bottom of the paper, we've gone through each area to give you an idea of some of the information around outcomes as best we can for the Isles of Scilly. And understanding, of course, that we always have this problem about sometimes numbers are suppressed specifically because it is a small population. So that's probably all I've got to say about it, but very happy to have a discussion and questions about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I was just going to throw it open on St Mary's for any comments or observations from people at the side. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 17, you note that with regard to the Healthy Schools protocol, an offer has been made to the school in September 17, but they've yet to take up the offer. Is there a time frame? I would imagine they're probably, with academisation in progress, they've probably got quite a lot to think about, but is there a timeline whereby they have to accept such an offer? Is it ongoing?
I think I heard the question. Again, I'm probably a little bit, but you're saying is there a time where we have to take up the offer? Is that right?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the service is always there. And we'd be very keen to engage at any time. But obviously, we totally understand that the school has other things that they need to deal with in recent history. And in the past, like I say, in the past, they've been very engaged with the school. So it's a bit of a lump, I think, really, that's all. We revised a healthy school offer 18 months ago, and so therefore we're going through a process of now re-engaging schools, and it's just that the RC hasn't taken it up yet.
Caroline, have they given any reason why not? I'm just wondering whether perhaps it's slipped through the net, whether they're unaware, whether we could perhaps give them a nudge, or whether you've had dialogue with them and there's a reason why they haven't.
I'm not sure the exact. I'm sure by the team that there has been contact between the two. It just hasn't started as yet. But I can look into that and find out. I mean,
You alluded to the fact we're going to talk about the JSNA later, but I would imagine, I'm assuming that a lot of what is in here will cascade into the JSNA where relevant. I know we're going to talk about the JSNA later in the meeting, but I'm assuming that much of what's in the contents of this report will cascade into the JSNA at some point.
Yeah, in terms of looking at needs and looking at outcomes, then yes, it's the same information will be used at both.
Councillor Grottick?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I ask if the programme of drop-in mole check clinics is dormant at the moment, or whether or not it's thought that we might be having any further ones? Because I gather they were quite good at identifying quite a few problems when they came previously.
As a result of the last...
Yeah, we haven't been funding. We had some funding to do mole check clinics a few years back. We haven't got that currently, and therefore it's not been something that we've been doing. I think there was something arranged practice for a while, but again, I'm not, that was done through public health.
Yes, sorry, Caroline, it's Aisling here. Just to update you, the last time we ran the mole clinic, it was so successful and it was proved there was such a backlog that the League of Friends funded a digital piece of kit where you could take photos of moles and send them to consultant dermatologists. So the practice still have access to that. So they are treating moles at an early stage.
I also think I'm right in saying that I've heard at previous meetings that GPs, for example, would rather, if you notice anything, you go up immediately rather than potentially waiting for a clinic. If in doubt, go and make an appointment and have it checked.
Yeah, I'm not sure the mole clinics and mole check clinics, it's not really good evidence base that they work. It's actually much better to as I say, it's to advise people to check their own moles and then just be aware of things that might raise alarm. There seems to be better evidence base around that kind of education than there does around doing regular annual checks or biannual checks. So that's why we wouldn't be so keen to promote them. And also we've got the right staff that were able to make diagnosis, so that would rely on our CHT staff essentially.
The final observation I was going to make, Caroline, was I would just love to make some of these services a bit more visible to our community, particularly around mental health, stop smoking, some of the drug and alcohol services. I would like to think that the people who need them are aware of them, but without doing some perhaps research in the community, I'm not 100% sure they do know they exist. So I just wonder whether there's a piece of work that we could do in partnership just to raise awareness of some of the work that is undertaken.
Yeah, we could have a conversation about that because, yeah, I'm not sure we know the best way of making sure people else see that. So it's probably a conversation between us to try and understand how that might be. And obviously a lot of it does depend on GP surgery. But we can certainly have a conversation about how we do it better.
And do you envisage any pressures? I note in your report you talk about year-on-year reductions. Is that likely to produce additional pressures on our services?
Well, we have 5 years of cuts. I think we're on second to last year now. So, we're working our way through it. I think it says in the report it's 134,000. Last year, I think it's going down to 131,000. I mean, yes, of course it does. Yeah, it does. You have to be very careful how you spend money. That's part. I mean, you're probably aware of this issue around the health system school nursing service, for instance. That is our biggest area of spend. And trying to make savings in that service has proved very difficult. And that's part of the reason for considering that we made that decision to bring it in-house to see if savings could be made in that way. So yeah, it's always a pressure.
I'm conscious a meeting or two ago we had a discussion around health as a licensing objective, but I'm not aware that's been taken forward yet under our licensing remit. So again, that's just something I will keep an eye on and liaise with our chair of licensing over. Any other final comments? Nothing at this end. Anything from any other colleagues in Cornwall? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I think in that case, we can take the recommendation as read that we have considered the report and noted the contents. Agenda item 7 is Better Care Fund, Governance and Scheme Review. And I think Aisling is going to take this report.
Okay, so there's a series of documents here, and all of them you need to have oversight of all of those, and as part of proper governance of the Better Care Fund. As you know, there have been historic issues about both how the Better Care Fund was set up within the local authority budgets, and then also making sure that there was oversight both by NHS Kerner and the local authority about expenditure. So for those of you who are new to the Health and Wellbeing Board, the Better Care Fund is money that passes from the NHS to local authorities to fund shared commissioning objectives between health and social care. The primary focus nationally is around delayed transfers of care, which is known as detox, and that's usually the bread and butter of most people who do my job is managing patient flow out of hospital into appropriate care. It's not an issue that we face on the Isles of Scilly, so we have slightly more flexibility about how we spend our money to support health and wellbeing more broadly. So we had an approved set of projects last year that the Health and Wellbeing supported, and then this paper goes through where we've spent money, where there still are risks to delivery. I've RAG rated some of those schemes, which means that because it's a 2-year funding programme, we actually have a sum of money to spend in this year, which could roll into next year, but the CCG finance needs to be clear about that to support our objectives. If we are looking at scheme review, then there's kind of some steps we need to take. So today, I would like to kind of get your broad ideas about where we might spend that surplus, and then we can work those into different schemes, submit them to the commissioning group, which sits outside the Health and Wellbeing Board, and then come back to you with the detailed proposals, which, given some of the kind of diary commitments, I suggest is delegated to electronic communication so we can actually make it happen. One of the key risk areas, as you are all aware, has been, and it's been an ongoing issue, is mental health day services. Certainly from an adult social care point of view, we see that there's a real gap around on-island mental health support, and adult social care is picking up quite a lot of mental health work where we have no statutory basis in which to support people. And, you know, to be honest, nor the expertise. It's been difficult to commission this because the key provider of mental health services isn't necessarily going to pursue a funding pot of £40,000 when they're dealing in the world of £1 million contracts. However, even since writing this report, there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. So we have the mental health commissioning team coming over on Thursday and Friday, and I've arranged for them to meet a number of stakeholders, including Health Watch, all the local professionals, and also some service users. I've also identified that somebody has just recently moved to the island with mental health background as a community psychiatric nurse. So it might be one of those moments where the stars align, where we might actually be able to form some kind of project. Now, obviously, the local authority can't directly employ anybody, and nor would we want to because we don't have the clinical governance arrangements in place, but potentially a health organisation may wish to host a project in this area. And it would be my strong recommendation that, you know, we wouldn't have put mental health day services in the schemes originally if we didn't think that's where the gap was. But nevertheless, there is some surplus money, which I think we could think about the kind of priorities that the community have informed us about through various Shaping Our Future consultations, and think where do we think this money is best spent. I will say that as a local authority, compared to other local authorities, we've spent very little on adult social care itself. So one of my proposals is enhanced health in care homes. But generally speaking, I'm really pleased with our kind of level of analysis of schemes to date. I have to say a massive thank you to Jill Thornton, who's on the phone here, who's been a real stalwart and very, very supportive in making sure that this Better Care Fund now is properly managed.
Thank you very much. How would you propose we go forward? There was talk in item 11 of having a short workshop after this meeting, or would you like to try and do it all now as part of one discussion?
It might just make sense to do it now. I mean, I said workshop, it's just a place to have a bit more of a discussion than to be just approving documents, so.
So on page 25, towards the bottom of the page under bullet number 11, we have some proposed areas for discussion. Is it worth, Aisling, just going through a quick synopsis of what they might mean?
Absolutely. Well, enhancing health and care homes is a massive system driver and is absolutely appropriate for expenditure. As you know, adult social care budgets are tight. The majority of the local authority resource is spent on the people that provide care, which is utterly appropriate. But actually, there is an opportunity to make some small-scale improvements to the care home in order to support an improved physical environment. Patient liaison at RCHT, again, this comes up time and time again in consultation, which is the idea of having a fixer, in inverted commas, at RCHT that will support not just inpatients, but also outpatients, so that if and when things go wrong, it gets foggy, there's somebody who kind of holds the ring and knows exactly where anybody is in that system. There's something around increasing physical participation, particularly by older people, and there's some stuff happening in Active Scilly. But again, this is a real passion from Healthwatch Isles of Scilly about how we support people to stay active. There are a number of organisations on the mainland who are offering now physical participation programmes for care homes and for the wider community. The community awards is an idea that could we have some of this money, which actually goes to the voluntary sector on the island. So say we had £10,000-15,000, people could bid in a very kind of proportionate way for small amounts of money, and they could run all sorts of things which would overcome social isolation. So that could be Memory Cafe might want to go for something, somebody might want to set up a kind of casserole club, they might want to set up a bingo night, a lunch club, but I just thought that there might be just organisations where £500, £1,000, £3,000 would make all the difference in making something happen. And I quite like that idea because I think it's good to hand things back to the community sometimes. There's also the whole notion of a care navigator, which has been successfully piloted on the mainland, supported by Age UK. And they are people that, as it sounds, help people navigate through what can be quite complex in terms of health and social care and help them understand their kind of rights. I would say, just based on my understanding of how it works on Scilly, that actually the system isn't actually that complicated. And actually we do have through Jeanette quite kind of clear signposting to resources, but you may well have a different perspective. There's still the X-ray training on the table. As you know, we've got this really good bit of kit at the hospital, but nobody trained locally to operate it. Again, resource on the island has been identified. Somebody with a radiography background. Potentially they could be trained. The training costs about £12,000. So again, it's weighing up the investment and business case for investing in a person to do that and making sure that that business case stacks up in terms of reduced visits to the mainland. And last one's around dementia support. Again, would we want to commission someone like Alzheimer's Society to offer a bit more kind of community work around a dementia-friendly community, but also offering more tools to support people with dementia who are often not absolutely even on the radar for services because they're not at that point. But as we know, the more you do with dementia at an early stage, the better the outcomes are. So they're the kind of areas. I mean, to be perfectly frank, I think all of them are kind of worthy of something. And I think mental health day services is really the priority. So if you could kind of suggest which areas you're particularly interested in, or if it's all of them, then we can put small pots against each.
Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I would totally support the mental health support day services. I think there's an unmet need within the community. I also think it's very cost effective because of the preventative aspects of getting in quick to support someone who might need that kind of care. So I would totally support that. I would also support the X-ray training. Since we have an opportunity to enhance the service, it just seems to have taken so long. I mean, training has been given in part, I believe, already, but we just don't seem to be able to get things up and running, so I support that. I would be wary of supporting A, because have we really looked at other sources of funding for enhancing the physical aspects of people's comfort at Park House? For example, we do have some trust funds that might be able to use that money for that, and then we could have more money for other services. So at the moment, I would say let's go for the X-ray training, mental health support, and increasing physical participation. But as you so rightly say, they're all laudable.
I think the point I'm trying to make here is that actually, compared to every other local authority, we have spent very, very little in direct adult social care services. And actually what we've been doing here is commissioning enhanced health services. And that's what the local authority is doing. So it's been a huge amount of effort from myself and my team to do that, but it's whether or not there should be some investment actually in supporting adult social care.
How much money are you thinking of, please?
I think today the thing is, I kind of need to see what happens with mental health day services by the end of the week. I think that the idea is if you could kind of say that there's anything off the table, it would probably be more helpful. And then I could give a proposed allocation when I've talked to colleagues who are at the end of the phone and when we go through the kind of proper scrutiny of the schemes. Because in order to change the schemes, I just need to have all the ducks in a row. For example, the X-ray training, we again need to make sure that the resource that was identified is actually still available to us, because these things change. So I don't think I'm saying for 10 for this, 10 for that. I think it's, are you broadly in agreement? Are any of them off the table? Or any of them particularly do you think are important? I think I'm getting a reading that mental health work, it certainly is. And then we'll go from there.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to make a suggestion under B, patient liaison at RCHT, as I think we all know by now that we are working on trying to provide accommodation for people travelling from Scilly to the RCHT base. To me, it would be logical to try and work in a person, a liaison officer there who would work to coordinate not only accommodation but the travel. Obviously, a lot of the problems arise from coordinated travel and time of travel. And if a person who was orientated from the Scilly point of view, who's experienced the problems that we have, it would eliminate the sort of problem that happened a little while ago when the weather was bad and there was, quite frankly, a very, very poor discharge of a patient through understandable reasons. But it's like all accidents, it was a succession of unfortunate incidents that ended up with a very, very disastrous discharge for this particular patient. And I could see the haven that we're working on. It's ideally located. It's closer or part of the campus at Truro. And I think that it would be an extremely good way forward of helping the problems that we have now and we will continue to have because of what the weather does to our transport accommodation, our transport situation. So I'd like to see some thought being given to a liaison officer being based at the haven, or perhaps being part of the staffing of the haven when it's up and running.
Okay, I mean, I think because the haven's not yet in place, this obviously is a scheme that would run, over the next year. But I think, we haven't yet had confirmation about better care funding in the future. But if, again, there is that kind of joint commissioning pot, then I think we could look at that then. But just at the moment, I'm thinking about immediate priorities. I'm also quite keen that we have schemes that we are able to spend, and we're not going to spend the next 6 months working through the solution. So while I think the patient liaison thing is really important at RCHT, I might have to align quite a lot of resource in RCHT before we can make that happen. But I do think it's a good idea, and certainly the community do.
Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst all these subjects are of clearly important, I would like to further comment on the X-ray training. I think it's imperative for us to try and take that forward. Did you say that we actually have identified somebody here locally that is able to take that forward. Is that correct? Yeah. Well, I think it's imperative that we try and pursue that. Clearly, you know, it costs an extreme amount of cash to keep flying people off, and we've got that facility here. We need to get the training done and get that in operation, I would suggest. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Are there any colleagues on the mainland who would like to make any points at this stage?
It's Jill here. I'm afraid the connection is really bad, and so I've been able to get the snippet. The last snippet I had was with regard to the X-ray. Now I thought that we had some further information to support that might have a different view on the requirement.
Yeah.
My understanding is that we were advocating some further investigation into the actual clinical activity, and combined with that is the fact that the clinical registration of the person involved. But I don't know, Ashling, if we've already got some of that information to support this discussion.
We do, but I've also just got some other information that I need to bring to the commissioning group, because it's whether or not that resource is definitely available. Which it's kind of not appropriate to discuss at this board, but I think it's more, I think that as the Chairman of Council has said, we absolutely support this. But I mean, to be honest, if we're trying to support the use of the X-ray, it can't just rely on whether or not that one individual is available. So I think we need to develop a scheme around it.
No, I don't know how I sound to you, but I can't hear anything, I'm sorry.
Such a nightmare.
No, I'm in the same position as Caroline here. I mean, I'm a little bit worried that when it comes down to the making a recommendation, I mean, I could probably agree, as a member of the Health and Wellbeing Board, I could probably agree with recommendations, because I read them full, but what I couldn't do is be able to comment on the suggestions for discussion on page 25, because I'm just not able to hear enough of the discussion. Sorry, guys.
I think in terms of a bigger picture, we're not making a formal decision here today. I fully appreciate that you're only perhaps hearing one word in three, which is lamentable. But I don't think we are making a decision today. I think we're just having a discussion around some of the options. Paul Charnock, Health Watch, did you have any comments?
Yes, if I may, and I would second and third comments about all the suggestions. All could be very positive in many ways, but we have to go. Health Watch has to go on what the public tell us. And from our survey of the community last year, it was quite clear that there were certainly two areas: dementia care and activities, or OT, rehabilitation, etc. There were only responses of numbers of between 25 and 30 people. But there again, that's 25 or 30 people who were bothered to complete the form and pass us that information to us. And we have recognised, and over some period of time, that those areas have been not as effective as they could be. The one other area that we would be interested in looking at is really it's for the dementia. We would hope that the dementia support would be embracing users and carers as sometimes separate services for them, or seeing them together. That's really all I have to add to the list at the present moment. Thank you.
So if I'm reading what I'm hearing correctly, as a board, we're not looking to rule any of them out. We like all of them to greater or lesser degrees. We need to leave it potentially with our officers to actually look at the feasibility of how achievable some of these are in terms of the resources we have. And as we've also said, we would just like a little bit of work on lead-in times. We don't want to spend a huge amount of time and effort on a project which in 2 years' time we're still talking about. So from the contents of page 25, we're accepting the broad proposals, and we're now going to leave it with Aisling potentially to work it up for the commissioning board. Is that?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There were several other documents as part of a recommendation. Is there anything you need to draw our attention to in those at this stage?
No, it's all about formal acceptance of all these documents, particularly the annual report, which gives you an overview of how schemes have performed to date. And I think you've got some real success stories in there, particularly around Buzzer Bus.
And I think we had terms of reference for a commissioning group, which should help hopefully resolve some of our governance issues.
Absolutely. So everything's now in place.
The only final reference I wanted to make was around disabled facilities grant. We've spoken about that previously at Health and Wellbeing Board, and we'd like potentially a paper at some point, if that would be possible, on where we're going with that.
We are revamping it, making sure that people are more aware of the scheme. The issue we have in delivery is actually local capacity to do the works required, which is something that's come up in housing conversations as well. So that is delay in the system.
Do colleagues on the mainland have any comments on the wider aspects of Better Care Fund and some of the recommendations away from the points we've discussed?
Just to help is that this was a joint report with Jill Thornton, so the NHS are happy with all these submissions. They've gone through all the appropriate gateways, just to give you reassurance that they've seen it.
Thank you very much. Can I just check if mainland partners are still there? Andrew, Caroline, Jill? Okay, well, please don't apologise. I think the apology is coming from us. I'm just honestly thinking, are we wasting your time trying to carry on in this manner? If you can't hear what we're saying, you obviously can't contribute. And I'm sure you've got other things which might be more pressing as well.
Because obviously the schemes were already on the BCS. So I think if I need to say anything about actually let's stick on the pilot decision and use this BCS voice as to be thought. We've obviously got clothes that we've rolled over from last year, and we've seen it clearly being demonstrated in different areas of the eyes, such as the dementia, the addiction stuff, and mental health day services, which we're trying to address, and we continue to do so. So I think it's about we might have to be agile in a different way, apart from come to another decision-making mechanism outside of this forum, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's clear. I think just for what it's worth, we are hearing you. What you're saying is being received at this end.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay. Where do we go?
We have the option. The external. Still for.
Yeah.
For who's in and completes the agenda.
Okay.
Some of the delegated
May I suggest that we do that and we ask our colleagues for written comments on the JSNA, for example, because that is important, and obviously that they feel they have input, unless you're going to move the rest of the agenda items to the next meeting.
I would move it.
What have we got left to do?
Chairman, I think you should leave it. It's not
Caroline, Andrew and Jill, if you can hear us, we're very conscious that you can't hear us and we're potentially wasting your time. So we would not take any offence if you now leave the virtual meeting. We will discuss what we can, but we will communicate outside the meeting for any information that we require from you or vice versa.
Business of the committee can progress, and I'm happy to do that as well. It's all a phone call and actual telephone, and then see if we sort something out again. Thank you for attempting this.
Thank you for your.
Thank you about GSNA. We need to catch up on Bob, and that will do between us, I think, and on that. I suppose what I was also thinking ahead. If we get dates in the diary that stay, don't get moved around, and we will really try and get out to the other city for the next meeting. I think we just need to do that exhaustion because of the difficulties around communication.
I agree.
I agree too. As I said, thank you very much for your time. Apologies for the issues which have hindered us slightly this morning, and I'll let you sign out. Thank you very much. Bye. I think, as you said, Bob, we're still core just to carry on to go through the documents we do have in front of us.
That's the will of the
Sorry, but the whole paper on a JSNA, to be honest, without the Director of Public Health and the NHS here, I don't see how we can progress.
This is just simply outlining the approach and as the asking for delegation for the chair and the vice chair to have oversight as we bring the different teams together in the first tranche. That will actually be quite useful for all.
Has the Director of Public Health seen this report?
Yes.
And agreed with the direction of travel?
Okay, so shall we formally just go on to agenda item 8? Did you just want to set out the context, Bob?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll take the report as read, and the purpose of this report is really to hopefully agree an approach moving forward to the development of a revised joint strategic needs assessment, which is one of the board's statutory documents. In essence, it's built as like a virtual folder with electronic chapters that can be adapted as and when required. It gives also the flexibility on what content is presented, say, for the Isles of Scilly and JSNA, and Cornwall and Isles of Scilly JSNA overall. There's an awful lot of information available. Much of that is held under license only by officers from Cornwall Council and the public health team. And it's where there's a great benefit to joint working. So this, because there's a huge potential range of things that can go in the JSNA, it's been broken down into different kind of tranches. And the tranche 1 themes that are listed there on page 61 is demographics and public health. So this is some of the easier to access information, but again, it's making sure that the information that Cornwall are able to extract under their licenses is actually kind of relevant and pertinent to the Isles of Scilly. And that's where kind of in the recommendation 2, it's requested that while there will be an element of that kind of sense checking among officers, it will be very useful to have some oversight from the chair and vice chair of the board as these themes develop before they come to the next meeting. And so I'll leave it open for discussion. Thank you.
I'm just keen not to have a JSNA which is 99% Cornwall and 1% Scilly as we move forward. So if we can have some assurance that Scilly is going to be proportionately represented in the documentation in terms of the data, the findings, but I think as chairman and vice chairman in recommendation 2, that's upon us to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, and I think also a request that this isn't huge. It needs to be short, and the big thing with joint strategic needs assessments is the so what, because you can gather all the data in the world, but it's what does it inform in terms of decision making and service design. just having gone through quite a lot of them recently, they just tend to be academic exercises rather than purposeful in terms of, so this shows us this stuff about silly and therefore we need to do X, Y, Z. And that's the most important use for a JSNA.
Any other comments? As we've noted, we don't have the Director of Public Health on the line at the moment to make any comments. Have you any idea what the timetable will be, Bob, for completing the document, the process?
And the entire JSNA will probably take another kind of year to 18 months, but we want to get those initial tranches kind of under our belt by kind of the spring. So there'll be a group coming to the November meeting and then a group again to the following meeting, which I think is maybe in March or April.
And potentially the opportunity between the formal boards to have discussions around direction of travel, I assume.
Yes, and also similarly to what the Ashing has said about how the presentation of this information actually is useful in being able to kind of judge this kind of strategic aims and objectives and achievements.
Okay. Councillor Grottick.
Can I just ask Ashley if you think embedded within this new protocol is enough monitoring based on the outcomes of what you hope to achieve? In other words, it's obviously going to take a long time to actually get the joint report in place. Is there then a formal monitoring process of whether or not you actually achieve the outcomes you've actually identified?
No, I'm totally relaxed about that. I just think it's just about keeping this simple. We've got a JSNA. I know it's a little bit old. Even when we update the data, it's not going to be surprisingly different. We are not going to find out anything brand new about the Isles of Scilly's needs. As in, we want to find out that we are an ageing population. We'll find out that we've got fantastic breastfeeding and immunisation rates. So actually, quite a lot of the data, even though it's from previous years, will be pretty much live. So I think the thing is, we need to have one that's refreshed. We need that for Ofsted. We need that for all sorts of people. But let's not turn it into a kind of massive piece of work in itself, because I would much rather just get to what the obvious conclusions are and actually therefore adapt services accordingly.
That was my point, actually. We don't reinvent the wheel, that we actually focus on the outcomes.
Absolutely. It's just JSNA can be a bit of an industry.
Okay, thanks.
So we have 3 recommendations. I think we've discussed contents which relate to them in terms of why we're having a JSNA. Chair and Vice Chair will be active in the oversight of a document and a timescale. So if we're happy with those, we will monitor the situation carefully and move on to agenda item 9, which is Health and Wellbeing Board Work Plan.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We've been including this as essentially a standing agenda item, and if we can discuss that's how you want to maintain it. It's probably quite useful. I realise that the November dates are missing as yet, so we can pick up those at a later chair's briefing. We've also had some discussion around the potential for an update around the Shaping Our Future programme coming to the November meeting as well. But yeah, I'll just hand it over to the floor for discussion.
We've got a provisional date for the November meeting, but I hear what Andrew, Jill and Caroline said. Perhaps we just need to go back and clarify if that date does suit the majority before setting it in stone. So we mitigate some of the issues we've had this morning.
Yes, I think I'd agree that going back to the entire board so that the board sets the meeting date, because we've tried to kind of suggest dates and then we've ended up having to work around, and kind of IT problems notwithstanding. So that would be really useful for the board to give the direction on the date.
Can I just maybe give a piece of information that might be useful in terms of updates, is that Teo has arranged for Helen Charlesworth-May to come over on the 27th of July. She works with Helen Childs on the Integrated Commissioning Partnership. So she will come and update members on where they've got to, because as you know, a gateway paper was going to come to full council in June. the work has slipped. It's not that we've been forgotten. The work has slipped as Shaping Our Future stuff does. So she's going to come on the 27th, and Teo's going to write to all members to come to a workshop. So you can find out about that.
And also in terms of our work plan, I think probably this board, more than any other council, board or committee, is reliant on strong IT. We historically have more external input from the mainland, and historically we have the issues we faced this morning. So I think within the work plan, indirectly, we just need to always be aware of the fact that we can't. It's embarrassing, isn't it, having a meeting like this? It's not conducive to good discussion. It's embarrassing to our mainland partners. It's embarrassing to us. So I think we just need to find a solution.
Chairman, could I just say that I would like to propose that you actually make a formal representation to the Chief Executive from this board, because this is totally unacceptable. I shall do the same in my role, but I think coming from you as chairman of this board, a formal complaint about today, because as you say, it's hugely embarrassing, very difficult for you. And it just places the Council of the Isles of Scilly in a very backward place. And this needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed now. So I would appreciate if you could take that forward, Chairman.
I will do, yes, happy to do that. Ashley?
I just wondered whether a paper, it would be very useful to have a paper at our next meeting about the Health and Wellbeing Board going forward, like how we set meeting dates, how we'll access things, and also our links to the Cornwall Health and Wellbeing Board. Because as you know, when the Health and Wellbeing Board came in, it was the same time as the Local Enterprise Partnership and Local Nature Partnership. So those trio were meant to cover every aspect of an economy and health and wellbeing and so on. We chose at the time that we would have our own separate health and wellbeing board, which I think is right in some ways, but I think actually we are slightly disadvantaged because, as you know, with the LEP, it's really good to be there at those meetings. So I think we might need to review how do we link into the Cornwall Health and Wellbeing Board, because, for example, a huge amount of work went into this Better Care Fund work. If we were to present it at the Cornwall Health and Wellbeing Board, I think firstly, they would see what very good work is going on here in terms of governance, but also you'd have all those partners there. And then to think about what the kind of subgroup on the Isles of Scilly is. I think it's a bit like with the Children's Trust Board and One Vision, where we're represented at the big strategic conversations there, where lots of stuff is going on, decisions being made, whilst also injecting the local flavour that's required. So I just wondered whether Bob and I might work on some ideas. We can talk to our counterparts in Cornwall, but I think it would also overcome some of the communication issues, because my worry is the Health and Wellbeing Board, firstly, it moves a lot, but we can deal with that in different ways. But secondly, there's all the technology. But thirdly, I'm not sure of actually the commitment to all the people that sit on this board in terms of coming. And how can we overcome that? Because we've got to bear in mind, you know, cost of flights, people's diaries and so on. So I'm just thinking a bit more interaction with the whole Health and Wellbeing Board and Cornwall might be a good idea. If I found out the dates of those, I might take my chairman and vice chairman of this board with me to their next meeting. You could have that political discussion as well about what the opportunities might be for joint working.
Councillor Grottick?
I think we should I totally support what Ashley's just said. I think there might be a legal requirement for each unitary authority to have its Health and Wellbeing Board. Certainly, Tom Watman certainly thought there might be issues around that, but working together sounds absolutely great. But I think we should separate out, with respect, Ashley, the fact that the communications that we've experienced this morning, again, has perhaps made people less committed to actually engaging with us. That's a totally separate issue, isn't it? And so I just think we need to, in other words, let's get the comms fixed. We've sat here so often. I totally agree with what the chairman has just said. We need to sort it. We need to sort it fast. And then at the same time, I would totally agree looking at how we could link up more properly with our colleagues, because in certain instances, their Health and Wellbeing Board, I understand, look at a report, and then we might look at the same report. That seems an extravagant use of time and resource.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right that specific thing. But if we look at the history of the Health and Wellbeing Board, which I've sat on for many years, and we look at numbers of them postponed, it's a very unlucky board in terms of weather. And actually, so I'm just trying to think about how we can really give it the status it deserves. You can discharge the Health and Wellbeing Board to another authority, a bit like with scrutiny. We just need to obviously set that up properly in governance. My concern always is whenever we join any partnership is how you absolutely make sure that the interests of the residents of the Isles of Scilly are well protected. And that's precisely my view as to why I'm suggesting we go to those boards, because I think we'll actually be on a bigger stage where we might actually get more done, because it was very, very hard to have this discussion about the Better Care Fund without the NHS here. Let alone, I mean, and it's a compromised technology, but not to have them here, because to be honest, it was their clinical expertise that I needed into all of this work that I have done to date. Because at the moment, the local authority is picking up all the commissioning responsibility. So if we do go forward with those 5 schemes, it will be me commissioning them, writing the specifications for all of them and putting them all out to the market, evaluating them and then monitoring them. But actually, the point of Better Care Fund, it's a shared pot of money, and we're meant to be doing this in partnership. So I'm just thinking, what are the mechanisms to increase that level of partnership where there is that commitment from health colleagues to making these projects happen? Because again, I just feel maybe we've been left with the baby. So,
well, in the interest of remaining open-minded to the best way of supporting health and well-being for the population of Scilly, is it worth taking the proposal that you will come up with some options and then sit down with the chair and vice chair, potentially in September, a month or 2 before the proposed meeting, to go through the options and sort of look at the pros and cons and things like that?
thank you.
Okay. Any other things you need to raise our awareness on this paper, Bob?
No, thank you, Chairman. Very useful.
Okay.
Might also, I think another thing to go on the work plan is an update from the Integrated Programme Board, which is doing the local implementation project for shaping our future, i.e. Park House and the hospital. So we should be able to give you quite a lot of information at the next meeting.
So I think the main recommendation is the points which are raised, but also to actually make sure we can try and find a date that suits the majority and won't be fog hindered. I think in that case it concludes the part 1 reports for this morning's meeting. We have a couple of part 2 reports for you to digest, but no part 3 items. So unless anyone has any final comments, I think that concludes this morning's meeting. Thank you very much.